Hi, I'm Fida Master Levi Cherbolenko, and in this series I explore the typical mistakes of people rated anywhere between 8,000 and 2,000. This is a first reaction, no engine analysis of a chess.com game played between 1216 versus 1219. Let's start. Alright, so white goes d4, d5, black mirrors white, bishop f4. This is the London system. Bishop f5 actually is not the best idea for black to mirror white against the London. A more normal move would be knight f6, and then black usually goes c5, knight c6. We could also play pawn e6, put the bishop on d6, opposing our f4 bishop, something like this. Bishop f5 is not the best anti-London system. Let's see, e3. Closing the chain, so we put the bishop first outside the chain, then we close the chain and open up the second bishop. Okay, pawn a6, I mean, that's too slow. What's the point of playing a6? Like, this is like such a typical mistake. There is no necessity playing a6. What's the point? Like what? Bishop b5 was a threat or what? I mean, it's not a threat. If white goes bishop b5, we just go c6 or knight d7 or whatever. Just c6 the easiest. So why waste time and play a6? A much more normal move would be to play something like, let's say, knight f6 and then e6, you know, or first e6 and then knight f6, you know, something like this. But like knight f6, e6, maybe put your bishop on d6, opposing our f4 bishop, play pawn to c5, put the knight on c6, castle short, and be fine. Still, white is better here, slightly better, but I mean, it's playable for black. But a6 is a complete waste of time. So in the opening, don't waste time on unnecessary corner pawn moves. Complete waste of time, alright? So a6, not good. Mistake, too slow. Okay, g4, wow. Yeah, that's crazy. g4, usually we don't play g4 in the London. That's interesting, but I don't think it's the best. Although it's interesting. I think like what would be a more normal move? So in the London, typically, white plays knight f3, the b knight we put on d2, the pawn goes to c3 in the London typically, and the bishop goes to d3. So usually there's no bishop on f5. Like I said, usually the bishop is on c8 in the London for black, and then when we go pawn e6, right? And this bishop maybe we fianchetto eventually, right? We play b6, bishop b7. So usually the bishop is not on f5 in the London. So white plays bishop d3, pawn c3. Now, here, this is not the best idea for white to play c3. Now, why does white, in the typical London, when the bishop is on c8, why does white always put the pawn on c3? Like, this is the cornerstone of pawn structure of London, right? c3, d4, e3. Why is that? Because in the London, like I said, usually white puts the light square bishop on d3 and doesn't have his opposition, right? The bishop is on c8. So the main purpose in the London is to attack black's king, which Vale castles on king side. The main goal is to attack black's king, is specifically h7. Now, black usually, to counter that, plays c5, right? To counterattack is in the center. The best counterplay is attack in the center, right? So they usually counterattack us with c5 in the center. Thus, we have to play c3 to keep our center strong, so that if we have a strong center, we can succeed on the king side. That's why we play c3, because after c5 we want to keep our center strong, because if we, I mean, first of all, if we don't defend it, we're gonna lose the d4 pawn, and if we, if we concede and we take on c5, then we lose the control of the center, and then black will be able to play pawn e5. Once we take dc, we'll be able to play pawn e5, thus open the game up, control the center, and thus no side attack will work. Side attack works when the center is closed, when we control the center, alright? So that's why we play c3. Now here it doesn't make sense to play c3. Why? Because the whole point of c3 was for us to attack on the king side. We put our bishop on d3, correct, like I mentioned earlier, and then we attack h7. But here, if we're not gonna play bishop d3, then there's no point to play c3. The whole point of c3 was to keep the center strong, to attack on the king side. If we do not attack on the king side, we should switch to another plan. And here we do not want to play bishop d3, because then we just take. And then we just take, and then there's no attack. There's no attack on the king side without our light square bishop. This would have been the worst trade for white, right, to play bishop d3. Because then, without our d3 bishop, there's no attack on h7. We need our d3 bishop. That's about the attack. But also strategically speaking, we should never trade these bishops. Because if you look at the pawn structure, we have this f2, e3, d4, right? Pawns on dark squares. So our bishop is good, is not restricted by our own pawns, whereas black will play e6 soon, and their bishop will be on the color of their pawns, like on light color, right? And so the bishop is bad. And so it's very favorable for black to exchange his bad bishop, although it looks active, but it is still on the same color. It is still on the same color. It doesn't matter if it's active or not active. c8 or f5, it's still a bad bishop. It might be slightly better, more active than on c8, but it's still a strategically bad bishop. So it's bad for white from a strategical point of view. Plus, it's also bad for white to trade this bishop, because not only because the bishop itself is weak, but also because of the squares. So because white puts all his pawns on dark squares, the opposite color is weak. The light squares, e4, the c4 and stuff. So our bishop on d3 would be guarding our weak light squares. And if we trade our light square bishop, then automatically we would weaken our light squares. When we put a piece, a knight or something, we won't be able to defend those squares. Do you see? So we need to change our plan. So here's the rule of thumb. When black plays bishop f5, and we play like slowly like this, like a6 and stuff, but even if you don't play e6, even if we play normally like with e6 like I showed you, but so when they play bishop f5, we have to switch our plan. And the best plan in these cases is to go not for c3, but to go for c4. This is the best plan against bishop f5, because again, the kingside attack no longer works. Like I said, bishop d3, they just take. We have to switch our plan. We have to play c4. Now, why is this so effective, especially against bishop f5? Because when we play c4, so we put pressure on d5, we prepare knight c3, but also something else, one other key element. We open up our queen. We prepare queen b3, but puts pressure on d5, but also puts pressure on b7. This is the biggest downside of bishop f5. It left the defense over key b7 pawn. See, when the bishop was on c8, this would not work as well, because the pawn would be guarded. But now it works very well, because the bishop on f5, although it looks more active, it actually oftentimes is worse than c8. Because although on c8 it's technically more passive, but it has an important function of defending the b7 pawn. And on f5, although it looks more active, although it strikes air, it doesn't really attack anything, especially after knight c3, it does not defend the key b7 pawn. So as you can see, more active not always means better. Alright? So c4 we go, you know, and let's say we go e6, yeah? Then we can go knight c3, develop our knight, put our knight behind the pawn, put more pressure on d5. Let's say black goes knight f6, and now white goes queen b3, putting pressure here and putting pressure here. And now it's not so easy to defend this pawn. How do we defend? Because so if we go queen c8, I mean, we just take the pawn, pam, 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 and we just take the pawn, for example, right? And it's just bad to have a queen. 9 points guarding one pawn. I mean, it's just bad. We also have a yes like rook c1, correct? And then open up a file, pressure on c7. It's just bad. If we play b6, that's also bad. Why is it bad? In these kind of structures, it's bad for black to play b6. Why? Especially with bishop on f5. Because when you play b6, which is a thin cathode structure, right? You should have a bishop on b7 to cover up this weakened light squares, right? But they just play bishop f5. So b6 only works with a bishop on b7. Otherwise, you weaken the light squares and you don't cover them up. Like this is a mismatch. This is a mismatch. Pawn on b6, bishop on f5. It should be either pawn b6, bishop on b7, or bishop on f5, pawn on b7. Not only that, but also the c7 pawn becomes backward. So the best strategy for white in these kind of positions is to soon open up the c file to put pressure on this backward weak c7 pawn, right? We play rook c1 now, or we first take, and then we play rook c1, and then put pressure on the backward c7 pawn, and also our bishop will be very great. This a6 pawn will also be a target, right, for our bishop, and so this is just so great for white. Okay, so this is how white should play in these kind of positions. Okay, even if black doesn't play a6 but plays e6, it works all the same. Knight c3, c4, knight c3, queen b3, putting pressure here. Okay, but white played g4. Yeah, this is kind of crazy. This is on the riskier side. It's interesting, but it's on the riskier side, so it's not necessary. Like, it's not necessary. Yeah. All right, bishop g6, pawn h4 makes sense. I want to play h5 and trap the bishop. Black plays pawn h5. Okay. I mean, yeah, this actually I don't think is the best. I think I think black should play maybe like maybe h6, and then if h5, bishop h7, because this way black doesn't weaken himself as much. When they play h5, the minus of h5 is they weaken very much the g5 square, but also the g6 square they weaken even more. They weaken even more the g6 and the g5 squares. So I'd say in these kind of positions, be more conservative. Play h6. Yeah. Okay, g5. I was just briefly thinking if knight e5 makes sense, but maybe it doesn't. Here attacking the bishop, but then bishop e4 with tempo attacking our rook. And then let me see. I was thinking if we could maybe, but no, we can't. If we play queen g4, bishop takes h1. I was just briefly looking, but no, obviously it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. Queen f5, attacking this, but we just go knight f6. Just go knight f6, and it does not work. Yeah. Yeah. No, probably knight f3. Maybe white does not need. I guess g5 is okay. All right. Plus the plus of g5 is it limits the development of black's knight. Okay, bishop e4. I mean, this is a waste of time. Why just goes f3? Again, should have just played e6 and quickly get the knight on f5. In these kind of positions, if black cannot put the knight on f6, black should put the knight on f5. It's the best square for the knight. So e6 would have been a must move for black. Bishop e4, waste of time. Okay, f3, bishop back to g6. I mean, yeah. I mean, the only upside I can see of this is that it stops the development of white's knight to f3 and e5. This could be one plus. But guess what? As black wanna go knight e7, knight e5, so white can go knight e2, knight f4 and put pressure on g6. Like I said, g6 is now a weak square, piece or square or whatever for black. g6 is just weak for black. So f4 is a great square for the knight in these kind of positions to put pressure on g6. So bishop d3. Now bishop d3 actually I don't think is good for white. Why is this? Because it helps. First of all, I told you about like the strategical aspect, right? Is like bad trade for white, but also you see, if like it helps black just like, I'm curious how they played. Okay, so it helps black. Let's say with a queen or whatever, helps black play g6, and now g6 is fine. Like now it's fine. Versus, imagine if we get a knight on f4, then we're threatening to take the bishop, and then if they play fg, we have a very weak pawn structure. If they move the bishop from f5, let's say they move it to f5 or h7, then we can push g6 and again damage his structure. So that's my point. Like, as long as black has this piece on g6, the bishop, right, and we put our knight on f4, if they allow us to take and we play fg, we have a damaged pawn structure. If they move the bishop and we play g6, again, we will damage their pawn structure. See? So it's very, the bishop here is very, very misplaced on g6. But by playing bishop d3, we help them play g6. Let's say we have a queen or whatever, we help them play g6. And now we no longer have this g6 ourselves. So now we have their pawn structure intact. That's my point. So remember, in these kind of positions, do not help them move the bishop and then play g6. That's their goal, to move the bishop and play g6. You have to play knight f4, and then once they move the bishop, you play g6 yourself and damage their structure. So a much better move would be to maybe knight h3 or knight e2. Let's say knight h3, I don't know. And then move the bishop to g3, and then play knight f4. Or move the bishop to h2 if we don't want to block the g5, right? Which will help us with g6, and then move a knight on f4. This would have been a much better strategy. Or to play c4, like I mentioned earlier, right? c4, knight c3, queen b3, putting pressure here, putting pressure on the b7 pawn, playing rook c1, putting pressure on the c file, and then playing knight h3, moving the bishop somewhere, and then knight f4, right? Also a possibility. But the key point is, do not do this bishop d3 stuff. You just help black. So bishop d3, a big strategical mistake, I believe. Bishop take, of course. Okay, white played cd. I mean, I can see the point, open up the c file, but I mean, it's easy to parry. e6 parry, black just goes c6. So I'm not so sure about this. I think this is a mistake. I think white should have played queen d3, activate the queen. Maybe could go potentially through b3, like I said earlier, right? Putting pressure on d5, on b7, maybe pawn through c4. There's also ideas like pawn e4. Also, of course, if black does not play g6 himself, we're gonna play g6. Remember, in these kind of positions, if you can, play g6, because you disrupt black's normal pawn chain. See, if they play g6, their pawn chain is intact. You always wanna break your opponent's pawn chain, wanna break your opponent's pawn structure, right? Create islands. And so this, I think, would have been, and it's just more development, right? You develop a queen, maybe even you'll castle queenside, who knows, right? Maybe develop your knight on c3 or d2, castle queenside, then develop a second knight on e2, push e4, black's king is in the center, open up the game. This looks pretty good. It's just much quicker, quick development. It's just development. CD, you do not develop. It's anti-development. So it's just bad, it's too slow. This is a mistake, I think. Okay, e6. I mean, it's okay. Also could have played g6, right? To stop g6, right? But, okay. e6. Queen b3. Okay, finally. b5. Okay, knight d2 develops the knight. Yeah, on c3, yeah, knight d2 is not so bad, because on c3 the knight would have no moves, I mean, right, it would be just limited, plus it would block the c file on d2. 1, it does not block the c file. 2, it could potentially go through b3 and then either a5, and then control b7, c6, or go from b3 to c5, which is also a great outpost for the white's knight. So this is not bad, actually. Another move would have been a4, typical idea. When your opponent has an advanced pawn, you want to challenge it. You always make pawn breaks through advanced pawns, alright? So a4 would be another interesting idea, you know, and now if they take, I mean, now we've destroyed their pawn structure. Now they have a scattered pawn structure, plus we open the game up, and we have a better development, right? And it helps us to open the game up, because then if we have better development, we'll have attack, like, because if the game is closed, then we cannot use our advantage in development. But if the game is open, then our pieces have scope, right? Our pieces have scope to attack them, and that's how we exploit our points under development. So a4 would be also not a bad idea. But okay, we go here, bishop d6, black develops. Okay, knight h3. Okay, yeah, this I actually like. This is good. Okay, it takes knight f4, very good square for the knight, very good square, attacking the h5 pawn, preparing g6. This is an ideal square for the knight. Knight e7, okay. Castle long. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Yeah, that's fine. G6, I guess, doesn't work yet. Yeah, because g6 they just take with a knight, takes, and I mean, we could maybe try it. g6, a potential pawn sacrifice. They take, and now it's very key that we play f5 to fix these weak pawns. I mean, I'm sorry, f4. We fix these weak pawns, but also we fix e5 and g5, these weak squares for black. Now let's say they castle, for example, and then we go knight f3, and we fix these great squares for our knights. We also prevent any pawn break, which is very key. It's key to prevent any pawn break, and we fix these squares for our knight. And next we can castle queenside, and then play rook g1, put our knight on e5, maybe bring the queen over to the king side, and so we'll probably most likely get the pawn back anyway on g6, and open up the g file and attack the king. So always remember this kind of pawn sacrifices, right? It's a temporary pawn sacrifice. Yes, you sack the pawn, but he has a damaged pawn structure. You have pressure on the g file. He'll have a weak king. You'll have great squares for your knight, and you'll most likely get the pawn back with interest. So actually, I think this is pretty interesting for white. Yeah, g6. Yeah, I think I like it. But okay, white castle queen said okay. Queen d6. Okay. King b1, yeah, good move, pretty good move actually, because you don't want to have like maybe some check potentially, or maybe black goes c5, opens up the c file, and then some check. You just want to take it away. Plus maybe we can put the rook on c1 and then put pressure on the c7 pawn. This is actually a great prophylactical move. Yeah, I like it. Okay, knight c6, not the best. We usually do not put the knight in front of a pawn. We usually play c5 and then put the knight behind the pawn. It's just weird to have a knight in front of a pawn. Yeah, because you just blockade it and it will forever stay weak and backward. Black should try to get rid of it. Should play c5. So this is not good. Okay, rook c1, yeah, very well. Yeah, the last couple of moves, yeah, pretty good by white. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Queen d1, bringing the queen over to the king side, the idea I mentioned earlier. But I mean, why not just take the pawn? They just castle. Why not just take the free pawn? And then you can go maybe like this. And then there's even ideas like knight f6 sacrifice, gf gf, and then we open up a king, right? And with huge attack, or just bring back the knight if you want, and then just push these pawns, right? G and h pawns. Just take the pawn. Why not just take the free pawn? Yeah. Yeah, queen d1, not the best move. e5, I mean, black also had potentially maybe this tactic, knight d4. And then if ed, oops, if ed, then queen takes d4, I'm sorry, queen f4. But I mean, of course, white is not about to take. White also has knight h5 now. And then again, those ideas I mentioned earlier, but see, the plus for black is b1 a pawn. b1 essential pawn. Yeah. So knight d4 I think would have been interesting for black. But okay, e5, at least they play actively in the center. Of course, another move would have been also g6, by the way, simply guarding the pawn. I think also would have made sense. Why not? Yeah, g6 looks pretty safe for black. Yeah. e5, no, e5 I think is not the best, because allows us to take, right? Okay, knight h5, okay. Here, queen g6 also would have been interesting, attacking the knight and attacking the d3 pawn. Also, maybe interesting, but okay, ed, e4, okay. Knight b4, attacking the d3 pawn, okay. ed, ed is interesting. Probably the idea is that if knight d3, then we have knight e4 attacking the queen and then also attacking the knight. Yeah, pretty interesting idea actually. ed, okay. Knight d3 we took. Not so sure about knight d3. That doesn't quite have knight d4. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I mean, maybe just knight d5 could have played. Or queen d5 also would have been interesting, attacking h2 actually. This I think would have been maybe would have made more sense. Because and then it's not so easy for white to defend, because if we play b3, let's say pawn hook for a5 a4, and then open up rook, right? So queen b3, we just trade the queens. Maybe white doesn't want to trade the queen, I don't know. And yeah, maybe queen d5 would have made more sense. Or I don't know, maybe knight b takes d5. The idea is to put the knight on e3. e3 is a pretty good square for black's knight. Also would have made sense, I think, something like this. Yeah, but knight d3, let's see, knight e4. It might be just a mistake. Queen d5, yeah, I mean, because, yeah, I don't think they can save the knight. Knight f2 doesn't work, we just take. Yeah, I think. Unless, wait a bit, unless there's knight, queen g6, and then if we take here, we just take here. Still, this is pretty good for white, I think, right? Black's king is pretty weak. We could take here. We could go here and then knight f6 ideas, right? Or we could go knight g3 and then play h5. Or we could just take the d4 pawn, right? So still, I think this looks pretty good for white. But I mean, at least black is not losing a piece. Queen g6. Now, of course, queen d3 is not the only idea. Maybe there are other ideas. I don't know. Maybe like knight f6 check first to destroy his structure. He goes here, and maybe now we take, right? And now his structure is very destroyed. If he takes, we just take and open up our rook, then knight f6. If they go f5, we just go knight f6, and then we have h5, right? King g7, h5, and if they take, we have rook g1. This is very great for white. It's just winning probably. So yeah, this looks pretty good. Yeah, knight f6 is probably still winning for white. Yeah, but still, would have been worth a try. This, I mean, there's no fight. And actually, queen. Actually, know what I just realized? I just realized there's actually knight f6. It's knight f6. GF knight f6 check. King g7, we just take the queen. Game over. Knight takes d5, queen d3. We just win the queen. And if knight f2, I mean, we just take on d4 with check. And then this is hanging, this is just game over. So this actually would have been winning on the spot. Knight f6. See? So what's the lesson here? Once you see a good move, you think, oh, I can take the knight. Think if you cannot take the queen. Or once you see you can take the queen, think, can I not? Don't have maybe checkmate in one move. Always look for a better move. Always look for a better move. But okay, queen d3 is also completely winning, of course. c6. Yeah, black just not apply prophylactic thinking at all, right? I hope white played knight f6. Just knight f6. It's crazy. Pam, 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 pam. Game over. Gotta solve puzzles. Gotta solve puzzles. Okay, here. Again, knight f6. I mean, black should play queen e6, right? To prevent it. Again, knight f6. Oh, finally, white played. Finally, yeah. Yeah. This is actually a pretty interesting game, quite a roller coaster. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.